Tools and Means. Written and read by John Miro. Episode 6. Amy gave an uncharacteristically girlish squeal when Claire walked into their room. She threw her arms wide, arms which were still tucked in an uncharacteristically professional blouse, and hugged her. "Thanks, Ames, but what's this all about?" she asked once she'd extricated herself. "What's it all about?" Amy echoed back, then reached up with a hand holding the neck of a very characteristic open wine cooler bottle to push her hair off her face. "Didn't I say you were a rock star? Your speech made social rules development and moral reconation therapy sound sexy. Everyone's talking about you, boss. There's a Romer hashtag about you on Twitter." Claire scowled. She hated Twitter. Why grown-up professional men and women needed to air their lunch menus and dirty laundry, she'd never understand. What's a hashtag? Amy was mid-sip at that moment and barely avoided a spit take. She got the gulp down before giving in to a giddy laugh. "What are you, 60? Don't ever change, Doc." The student backed up against her bed and sat heavily, bouncing a couple of times. Claire allowed herself a small grin. "I did think the speech went well." "No shit," Amy scoffed. "The line of people shaking your hand after, was that your first clue?" She leaned back and stuck her hand in her pants pocket. She withdrew a stack of business cards and tossed them through the air to scatter on Claire's bed. "Seems you need a social secretary." Claire sat on the corner of her bed and crossed her legs, staring at the cards. "All right, yes, it went well," she admitted in a small voice. Staring at Amy, she couldn't keep a matching grin from spreading across her own face. "Fine, I rocked it," she said, reddening slightly. Too bad the room was full of underfunded doctors. And one Illinois senator, don't forget," Amy said, leaping off the bed and crossing to the bathroom. "He was there?" Claire had seen the senator only once, catching a glimpse of the man heading into a morning session. "Oh yeah," Amy called from the bathroom. Claire heard ice shifting. "One of his flunkies was just here too," she said, and reappeared in the doorway, twisting the cap off another dripping cooler bottle. Claire stood up fast. "He was. What did he say?" She bit her lip, suddenly panicked. Was dinner off? Had the senator changed his mind? Amy handed her the bottle. "Relax. He just wanted to tell you the senator would meet you at his bar at his hotel, the Biscayne, before dinner." She pointed to the small desk between their beds. "And he left you that." Claire had the wine cooler halfway to her lips when Amy made the gesture. She crossed quickly to the desk, setting the bottle down and clutching up a thin plastic binder. It was a request for proposals package. Illinois had committed money to rehabilitative treatment. She gasped as she read their timeline. "Yep," Amy said, over her shoulder. 5-year pilot. "Oh, and I want a raise." She was going to pull this off. She was going to. "I'll save the next one, Dad. And the one after that. And all the ones who can't stop themselves from violence, I'll save them too." She was going to change things. Make the system care again. Make it help people instead of sticking them in smaller and smaller boxes until they opened the cage doors and let out worse animals than had been forced in. She blinked back a tear and slammed the binder shut, just barely suppressing her excitement. "It's still just an RFP. That means he could go with someone else." "Read the sticky," Amy whispered in her ear. Claire frowned at her, then looked back at the binder. At the top corner was a tiny, adhesive-backed square. It read, "We want you in Illinois, Dr. Romer." The words angled up and away, not following a straight line across the paper, a sign of confidence. The words were straight up and down, no slope left or right. Strong-minded, indomitable. The two underlines beneath the scrawled G. Newell betrayed the writer as self-centered, arrogant. Yeah, that sounded like a politician to her. And this politician wanted her. She shook the binder with both hands. "Yes! Hell yes!" Amy echoed loudly, then leaned in and took the binder from Claire's hand. "And, Doc, get me that raise, will you? Wear the dress." "You smell blood, don't you?" whispered Bob. Tom grunted and shrugged his shoulder away from the phantom's hot breath. Bob laughed. Tom closed his eyes tight. You're not here. Don't lose it, Tom. He took a deep breath, denied the phantom his existence, and when he opened them again, Bob was gone. Tom kept on walking, just fast enough to keep his mysterious quarry in sight. What are you up to, Senator Newell? Tom growled, as the sidewalk began to incline. He followed the man up a bridge where Brickell became US 41. There was a tower on his left to control the lift bridge ahead. He made like a tourist and took it in, staring at the double green doors and 3 bulky concrete stories of the structure, then admiring the skyscraper condos and skyway-style bridge further down the waterway. When he turned to examine the bay on his right, and the docks where the cruise ships disgorged their passengers, he saw that George had made a friend. Tom kept walking, watching out of the corner of his eye, as George shook hands with a tall man in a straw trilby hat and loud checkered shirt. Immediately after which, George did an about-face and headed back Tom's way. Tom thought about being invisible as George walked past, thought about pork sandwiches and cruise ships, and letting the sound of the water lapping against the waterway drown out the torrent of his thoughts. The fat politician walked on past. Tom stopped at the top of the bridge. The man in the hat was gone back the way he'd come. Now he risked to look back over his shoulder, and George was a speck in the distance, his own waddling self again, likely heading towards the Viceroy and another round of mojitos. The handoff had been good and fast, but Tom had seen whatever the man had given George. Something haloed in a soft blue glow. Tom's eyes narrowed in the green and white dot that was Newell. What the hell is going on? Then I said, Lady, get your dog off my dog, or I might call the fire department to hose him down. All the men laughed. Claire smiled, as politely as she could muster, and raised her still mostly full drink to her lips. She scanned the clock behind the bar across the room. Had she really been sitting here for 3 bloody hours? Newell had been late arriving, and making small talk with the other politicians had been a chore. None of them were involved with rehabilitation or prisoners in any way, and she had no clue what to ask them about politics either, but she needn't have worried. The men quickly ignored her and traded glances and none too subtle grating references to the legs and buttocks of the serving staff. Claire lowered her head into the glass, feeling one of the long, slim earrings she dressed up with dangle on the skin of her neck as she hid from the ignoramuses and got a snootful of wine. She took that sip to numb herself against talk of coding violations and real estate trades between the city and private developers, all of which sounded shady to her. She had had enough. Resolve made her thump the glass back down on the table, but none of the men even noticed. Senator, I have to prepare for tomorrow's session and must get back to my room. Perhaps we could take a moment to discuss— Oh, you want to leave, ma'am? I'm so sorry, sniggered one of the others. She kept the venom from her answering smile. I just need a moment of the senator's time. We'll get to it, Claire. Don't worry. I'm staying for the whole conference. Tonight was meant more as a chance to socialize, really. Claire tried not to grit her teeth. I see. So help me, Senator, she thought to herself, if you're wasting my time. Newell scratched at a roll of flab at his neck. I see I've ruffled your feathers, Doctor. Tell you what, stick around a little bit longer. Have another drink, and I promise we'll take 5 minutes to start the ball rolling. Soon, okay? Claire smiled her most winning smile. At the same time, she waved down a passing waiter to order that second drink. Of course, Senator Newell. She was going to need that drink. Bellied up to the long bar in the Viceroy, Tom ordered a second Guinness. His blood was up, he knew. Spending hours in the same room with his target was stupid, he knew, but he kept watching George. Newell had spent hours buying rounds for a table of toadies and politicians at a stately table near the open-air patio, right at the edge of the building. Several older men and a few younger ones, all politicking with well-lubricated and likely forked tongues. And one woman, younger than all the rest, blonde and wearing a party dress. Tom was bothered by that girl. She didn't fit, and he liked all his pieces to fit. Of course, this night none of the pieces were fitting. He reconsidered her. He had at first taken her for a party girl, the kind attracted to the rich and powerful, even corpulent and corrupt, like Newell, but it didn't fit. Aside from the dress, which was quite lovely, he had to admit, she didn't wear enough makeup to play the role of party girl. Another thing, too. She talked. Not a lot, but she interrupted Newell and the others occasionally. Through the night, one by one, the men dropped off, and by the time Tom's second empty Guinness had been taken from him, there were only two at the table, George and the woman. She seemed a good deal more sober than George, but after the politician's little rendezvous on the bridge this afternoon, Tom wasn't even sure he believed the drunk act. She was also far more serious, frustrated even. He watched her construct a smile for the laughing senator, saw how it cracked the moment the man looked away. What was with this woman? He wished she would just leave. Finally, as a bartender pointedly wiped the length of bar in front of Tom, that he knew he wasn't drinking enough to occupy, Newell stood and pulled back the chair of his guest. She stood and fumbled with her purse, ignoring his protestations and paying for her 2 glasses of wine. Tom's eyebrow rose. Only 2 drinks. Only 2 drinks? He had an excuse. He wondered what this woman's story was. Allie appeared, watching Newell and the woman halfway between the two of them and Tom. Her forehead was bunched with worry, and she shook her head when he rose to follow as they headed to the elevator. "I know this is stupid," Tom muttered. Then his eyes flicked back to George and his guest. When he looked back to Allie, the air was empty again. "She's right," Tom told himself. "Bail. Just get out of here." Then he watched the woman stumble on the short steps leading down to the elevator, and a suddenly nimble Senator Newell caught her arm, righted her easily, then continued to steer her on towards the elevator, still holding her elbow. "Where'd your damn waddle go now, George?" Tom asked himself. He dropped enough to cover his bill, and a healthy tip for his time, and followed the two across to the elevator. He slid sideways between the closing doors, flashed a smile at the two, and then ignored them. On the panel before him he saw a solitary floor lit up. 17. He pressed for 18 and stared ahead at the mirrored steel door. He averted his eyes politely, as people on elevators do, and drew his face into the best approximation of bored and tired that he could muster. "It's not that I don't appreciate your time, Senator," the woman said primly. "Good, good. And you stuck it out with the old farts all night, Dr. Romer," George said. "And you did stick it out with us old farts all night, Dr. Romer," George added. "And I told you this afternoon that we'd get down to brass tacks soon." He chuckled self-deprecatingly. "Just as soon as I get out of these shoes and make myself a coffee." Dr. Romer laughed politely, but Tom sensed her frustration. She played along well. Tom was sure she was not fond of these games. "As we discussed in our emails, I need to expand my research. That's an opportunity for you. I mean, an opportunity for my work. Look, I'll be honest. I need access to your demographic to keep my research going at all. I know I'm not supposed to say that. There will be considerable dividends for your state, most notably the rehabilitation rate. Violent offenders, I can guarantee it will go down. And of course, bragging rights come with this come voting time." She was selling him on something. Poorly, as well. Too honest, that's what her problem was. She covered the desperation in her voice pretty well, but Tom had heard it enough, balancing the scales, to catch it. Newell laughed again, non-committally, Tom thought, but he could smell a trap on the politician. He was careful not to seem over-eager, and much better at hiding his emotions than the woman, but he obviously wanted to get her alone. Was he planning rape, or some other violence? Tom's body tensed as the elevator slowed and a bell chimed. "Excuse us," the senator said brusquely, his hand pushing against Tom's bicep. Tom stepped to one side, now free to watch them without suspicion, as George left the elevator and the lady doctor followed. "My Michigan pilot shows marked reductions in prison stays," Dr. Romer said quickly, following the older man down the hall. I just need someone with the state's ear, with the vision to see what this work can mean." George shrugged, feigning indifference. Tom knew it was a lie. His eyes narrowed as the steel doors closed. He'd baited traps just like this. Dr. Romer had no idea she was already hooked. And George Newell was reeling her in. You have been listening to Tools and Means. Title music, Infiltrate This, by Atlas Plug. Use with permission. For show notes, more information, and other fiction by me, John Miro, please visit servingworlds.com. Thank you for listening.